Recording over here. Okay. Neil, if you can keep letting folks in as they come in, and please put in the chat where you're joining in from. I think I have it set so that everyone can. There we go. Have it set. Okay. Thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to our organizing workshop on All Politics Are Local, Organizing for Change at the Local Level. My name is Sarah Blahovic, and my pronouns are she and her, and I am a white woman with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. I'm wearing glasses and a navy blue shirt. Today's event has live captioning and ASL interpretation. Our ASL interpreter is spotlit on screen. To view the captioning, click the Show Captions icon along the menu ribbon. I will change this. So if we will have opportunities for Q&A throughout, please feel free to share your questions in the chat with myself, with our Disability Victories co-founder, Neil Carter, and Dom Kelly, who is our presenter for today. You can also email them to hello@disabilityvictory.org. You can also raise your hand and we will unmute you whenever time for Q&A comes. Please keep your questions brief so everyone has time to ask their questions. If you are new to Disability Victory, welcome. Disability Victory is a 501c4 organization. Our mission is to build the political power of disabled progressives through training, networking, and leadership development. We envision a country where disabled people have the information, support, and skills they need to successfully lead as candidates, elected officials, and campaign staff. And you can learn more at disabilityvictory.org. As I had mentioned, we are recording today's workshop, and then once we have it captioned afterwards, we will upload it to our YouTube channel. And we also have uploaded, if you missed our fabulous session with Rebecca Lamort on lobbying last week, that will be added soon as well. And with that, I am going to introduce today's speaker, Dom Kelly, who is the co-founder and CEO and president of New Disabled South and New Disabled South Rising. I need to stop sharing my screen so I can turn it over to Dom. Are you able to share, Dom?
Let's see. Yep, I am.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, give me 1 second here.
And as a reminder, which I know you're very familiar with this, let's keep a good pace for the ASL interpreters and CART captioners so that they are not playing catch up with us. Something I always have to remind myself to do.
You got it. All right. 1 second, trying to figure out how to, okay. All right, go into present mode. All right, well, hello everyone. It's great to be with you. My name, as Sarah said, is Dom Kelly. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns. I'm a white man with brown curly hair, dark facial hair, wearing a tan colored collared shirt, and sitting on a couch with a violet wall and a mirror behind me. I am calling in today from Atlanta, Georgia, on stolen Muskogee Creek land. And I, in my day job, am the co-founder, president, and CEO of New Disabled South, a C3 organization, and New Disabled South Rising, our 501c4 arm. It's really great to be with you all. I'm excited to talk to you today about organizing at the local level. Before I dive in, a little bit of background on me. I've been organizing for, I guess, almost 16 years now in the South. I have been organizing in different movement spaces. primarily in Charleston, South Carolina, and have lived in Savannah, Georgia, currently live in Atlanta, Georgia, have hopped around a bit and call Atlanta, Georgia home now, but have been organizing for a long time. I've been disabled since birth. I have cerebral palsy and come to this work from my own lived experience, from the experiences of the people in my community, and just a desire to help people build power. And this couldn't be a better topic, I think, for me because I care so much about what that looks like at the local level, and how we can continue to build power as communities, but do it in a way that has enormous impact. And sometimes the biggest impact happens at the local level. So we'll dive into that. But to start, want to start with a little bit of why local organizing matters. And some of this may seem obvious to you, and maybe you already understand this, and that's why you're here. Um, but to start, um, we all know that what happens at the federal level impacts our day-to-day lives, and impacts what happens in local government specifically. So when we are talking about a bill like the big ugly bill that was passed in a couple of weeks ago, that bill has not just implications for individuals across this country and their access to healthcare and their access to food and all of the other things. But it has impacts on local communities, their ability to get resources, their ability uh, to have the things that they need, the governments need to provide for their citizens, things like that. So what happens at the federal level makes it more urgent for local action to take place. And when we think about government, right, oftentimes if we're talking about elections, people are always thinking about the presidential election or other federal elections, right? People running for Congress, etc. And those are critical elections. Federal government impacts so much of our day-to-day lives. But when we think about things like our access to housing, policing, when we think about um, transportation infrastructure, even when we think about education, so much of that is governed at the local level. And so much of that has to do with city councils, so much of it has to do with school boards, um, different county level commissions, things like that. So um, we know that yes, federal legislation and what happens in the federal government is so important, and it's so important to organize around that. But organizing locally is really not only where you can feel change happening, but you can see it impact the lives of your neighbors and those around you. And those seemingly small wins actually help to build long-term power and ultimately protect our communities. So if we're talking about small wins, like something that I advocated for here in the city where I live, um, and the disability community in my city came together and we won, better access to sidewalk infrastructure, right? We got the city to fix sidewalks. That shows that we have power, right? And that power can build and build on top of each other, and then ultimately could help us expand and build power at a higher level. So the very basic is that local organizing is really critical for power building. And if we're thinking about it through a disability lens, I think it's even more critical in this moment because so many people in our community and organizations and organizers did so much work to stop these awful Medicaid cuts in this bill and so many of the other things we're going to see that impact our community. And right now, the disability community does not have a lot of power. So maybe that's why y'all are here. It's like, what can I do in this moment to make an impact? We can make an impact at the local level. So I don't need to go too much into it, but I think you all know probably a little bit about how local government works, but it depends on where you live. There are different structures for local government. So I live in the city, technically in the city of College Park, Georgia, which I say Atlanta. I can use Atlanta in my address. I'm 10 minutes from downtown Atlanta. Um, and my backyard is almost quite literally the Atlanta airport, but I technically live in the city of College Park. So what happens in Atlanta City Council, the mayor of Atlanta, doesn't necessarily impact what happens in College Park, Georgia. In College Park, Georgia, we have our own mayor and our own city council. Um, Now we're a city of 13,000 people. That's a very small city compared to Atlanta, which is much, much more. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. Um, but we have an enormous budget. We have a $200 million budget for our city of 13,000 people. And that's because the airport is in our city, the Atlanta airport, which is the busiest airport in the world, literally. Um, and so what happens here impacts my day-to-day life and the day-to-day lives of my neighbors, but it also has rippling impacts across the Atlanta metro area and across the state and across the country. And that may be the case for you, or you may live in a small town or city where what happens in the city level impacts just your city, and that is just as important as a city like College Park, where every decision that's made ripples across our state and our region and our country. Um, Different states have different structures, but in most states, counties have their own commissions. There are specific commissioners that are elected. Oftentimes they're elected. It's possible in some states they're appointed. I'm not entirely sure every single state, but to use Georgia as an example, our county commissioners are elected. We have school boards, city level, county level. A lot of those are elected. And there's also other local boards and commissions. So here in College Park, our city council, we have different committees that are part of our government structure, whether under the city council or broadly in our city government. We have BIDA, which is the I can't remember what the B stands for, Business Industrial Development Authority. So they specifically do the city's real estate, all of the kind of like development stuff that happens, and that happens independent of city council. And these are not elected people, these are appointed people. So who we elect matters because they appoint people to do very critical things. And that's not the case in every city government. That's the case in our city government, at least. So, um, all that to say that whatever the structure is at the local level, there are it's important to learn how it works. It's important to understand how your local government works in order to organize. And I will say that organizing is not just about government, and you all know that. Um, but it's important to understand, even if you're organizing to do mutual aid, even if you're organizing to get resources, crowd-funded resources for some kind of structure, right? Like there's different things to organize around. It's not necessarily around government and policy. It's still really important to understand how your local city, town, whatever it is, operates, because oftentimes those forces can be barriers, regardless of whether you're organizing around policy or elections or whatever it is at the local governmental level, that has an impact. So there are lots of opportunities and ways to organize. So I'll think first about like within the government system of advocacy. So most cities have opportunities to do local advocacy. So uh, most cities have public meetings. I think I would say probably most have laws that require public meetings. So here in city of College Park, we have city council meetings, mayor and council meetings that happen every other week on Monday nights, and they happen like 4 blocks up the street from me, and it's an opportunity for some residents of the city to come to listen, to be a part of, to make public comment, things like that. Um, that is a really good way to educate yourself about what happens at your local level. Um, Also to just be more informed. Um, Building relationships with local officials is also really critical. There's a lot of there are a lot of things that come into play when we're talking about building relationships. But there is a most local officials, if they're elected, want to have relationships with the people in their constituents because those are the folks who are gonna probably elect them, or re-elect them in that case. So I think like it's important to try to build relationships with the people who have decision-making power. That is a really critical part of any organizing strategy, whether you're organizing to get policy shifts or whatever it is, or you're organizing separately. Having those relationships can be really beneficial regardless of what you're organizing around. Um, like I said, there are usually in every local governmental structure, there's public meetings and usually a way to testify or to submit public comment. Um, Here, you can go to the mayor and council meeting in person. You have the opportunity to speak for a certain amount of time. You can email in comments. I've been to county level meetings where it's the same structure, um, things like that. Um, uh, there's also ways to organize public education campaigns, and I'm going to get into a couple of case studies to talk about. But if you have an understanding of how local government works, uh, it's really critical and can be very beneficial to educate the people around you who may not understand it, who may not be engaged. And I'll share a way that I've done that with my neighbors, and maybe that'll spark something for you. But you can even make it issue specific. You can even make it disability specific if we're thinking about the local impacts on disabled people. Like, how can you educate disabled people about the way the government works so they can be more involved? Or how do you educate non-disabled people on the way that local governmental policy impacts disabled people so that you have a broader base, right? So there's different ways to do that, but a great opportunity is to just educate people for how that like how these kind of systems work. Um, and then you all are very familiar with Disability Victory, I would imagine, and maybe you're engaged because you're thinking about running for office. Uh, Running for office is a really important way to get involved at the local level. Um, Oftentimes it is like not a lucrative decision to make. Most local government doesn't pay well, if at all, depending on where you live. Most of the time, local or even state level office is not a full-time job. Um, Right, but there's so much benefit to having people with lived experience in these positions. So that may be why you're here, but I have to make a plug for running for office because I am talking about that. And absolutely to the chat, seeking appointment to local commissions, 100%. We have a number of local commissions here in College Park, and I am advocating always to get good people appointed to those local commissions. If I had time, I'd probably do it myself. But making sure people are part of the housing authority board who understand what it means to live in the housing authority, who understand what it means to be a disabled person living in affordable housing, right? Like those are the kinds of lived experiences that we need to those kinds of boards and commissions. So that goes back to building relationships with local officials that can kind of help you to get to get those opportunities to be appointed. And then of course supporting others who are running. And if if you have relationships with people who are running for office, or even if you don't, finding people that are good and supporting them and figuring out how to bolster their opportunity is a really, really important way to get the right people in the right positions. Um, and then beyond that, like governmental level advocacy and organizing, whatever you're organizing around, whether it is changing policy or whether it's mutual aid for your neighbor. I think it's really important that we talk about how we build a base. Like, how do you build a base of people who are mobilized, who are educated, um, and who have the same goals, whether or not you have the same ideas for tactics or strategy, you have the same shared goals, and you can come together and you can work toward those shared goals. So when I think about building a base, I want to find those people who share my concerns about my community. I'm going to share an example in a minute for how I've done that here at College Park. But I want to find those people who have the same concerns that I do, who want to see our sidewalk infrastructure improve, who want to make sure that folks who receive a homestead exemption so that they don't have to pay property taxes, aren't just people 65 and up, but people 65 and up and people who um, uh, are permanently disabled, right? Like that's just one example of like something that may be an issue. But like I want to see people who also understand and agree about what the concerns are, not necessarily how we get there, but that we all agree that there are things we can improve on. So those shared concerns is really critical. Um, Building a core team. Now, you may want to formally build something in your community, or you may want it to be informal and decentralized. Uh, Whatever that looks like, I think it's really important to have a core team of people who are committed to doing that base building, doing that education, mobilizing and growing a group of people in the community who want to see change. So whether that is a formal structure, leadership structure, where you have someone who's leading and then you have different roles that people are assigned to do or whatever that is, or it may just be that each person has a shared leadership without a hierarchy. Whatever that looks like, building a core team of committed people, I think, is really important. That is, a really important part to organizing in general. Um, and uh, and especially at the local level, you want to make sure that you have folks who are committed, because this organizing takes time. It takes effort. It takes yeah, it takes a lot to organize for something you want to change. So having people who are committed and who can be a core team, and also who are going to make decisions when decisions need to be made. Because if you're building a base and you want to build, let's say, you want to, your goal is to get 100 neighbors engaged in whatever your campaign is you're organizing around. And I don't mean electoral like campaign. I mean any campaign, if it's for mutual aid or whatever that is. Um, you it is great to have 100 people engaged, but 100 people making decisions that need to be made is probably not going to be effective or efficient. So who are the people that are the core team? Um, who are the people that, if let's say you organized 20 of those people to show up at City Hall and testify about an issue, um, who are the people where, if that the day of, hours before your meeting, you find out that the police are going to be there and they're ready to arrest people, who are the people that you're going to pull together and say, okay, we need to make sure we have our plan in place to protect people who are showing up, and what do we do and how do we respond? Because you're not going to necessarily want to bring 20 people together to make that decision. That's just one example. But finding those people that are committed and building that team is really critical, whether you have a hierarchical leadership structure or more decentralized or more shared leadership, whatever the structure is. It's really important to find those people who are going to be the high level, especially rapid response decision makers, because as we know, in this environment at the federal level, but also otherwise, it is really important that we think about the risks of organizing. And so to have people who are really thinking about that structurally is really critical. Um, Another great way to build a base, an important thing to think about when building a base is to use storytelling. So you may be doing some canvassing in your local in your neighborhood, right? And you may be going door to door. You may be organizing some town halls, and you want to talk about the fact that there is. I'm trying to think of a good example here. I'm just going to go back to sidewalk infrastructure, that the sidewalks on Main Street have been, completely broken for 3 years and the city's done nothing about it. Um, uh, it's ideal that most people who are there will agree that we need the sidewalks to be better, right? But like, not everybody is going to see that as a critical issue to like drop everything and spend their time on trying to rectify or to like doing some really deep organizing to get, some decisions to be made and resources mobilized around this. So storytelling is such an important way to connect with people in your neighborhood, right? So you may want to find people who have, a wheelchair user who may have a story about how they weren't able to like access, whatever restaurant down on Main Street because the sidewalk is messed up and no one's done anything about it. Right, like that's just an example, but finding the people who can tell the stories is a really important way to build a base, to bring people in, to get them engaged in the work, and then to mobilize them. And that storytelling happens when you're directly advocating for something and organizing around something, and also when you're just building your base of supporters and people who want to be a part of that organizing. And then, of course, focusing on those who are most impacted first and foremost. So you may really care about, the health inequities. For example, I live in College Park. It's an 88% Black city. I really care about the health inequities in our city. The fact that uh, the closest two hospitals near us both closed down within a matter of a couple of years, and that the folks in part of our city who live in, the most low income areas now don't have access to hospitals, and maybe they don't have access to transportation because we don't have public transportation in College Park. It's a whole other story. But like, I care about that deeply, deeply, and that's part of what I organize locally around. But like, I'm not the most impacted person in that story. Um, right. So like, how do I find those people who are impacted directly? Um, and how do I not just make sure that they're a part of telling their story uh, in whatever way they feel comfortable, but also like, am I finding people to help build their own leadership? If I have the leadership capability and the time and all of that, like how am I finding those people to help them build their leadership to organize, invest in them? Do I need to be testifying during public comment every city council meeting? Or can I take a step back from the mic and give the mic to that person who's most impacted and make sure that they tell their story, assuming they want to, right? Like that is part of building a base and having an organizing structure that is, I think, rooted in disability justice principles and making sure that those who are most impacted are leading. Um, so I'm going to give a couple examples, and I want to start with Cop City Vote. So some of y'all have heard about Cop City. It is a police training facility that it has now been built in well by the city of Atlanta, but in DeKalb County, um, Georgia, which is part of DeKalb County, part of Atlanta is in DeKalb County, Georgia, but where Cop City is, the city of Atlanta built it and they own and they lease the land, but they don't the people who live there are not City of Atlanta residents, so they can't vote for City of Atlanta council members, mayor, etc. So the people who make the decision to build this um, are not elected by the people who are most impacted by Cop City. So there's numerous reasons why cop people have in the community have not wanted Cop City. The environmental impacts of destroying hundreds of acres of forestry, um, the reality that Cop City is called Cop City because it's literally a mock city, where they are basically testing out and modeling militarized policing or uh, expanded militarized policing with tanks and machine guns and things like that. Um, so there's the impacts of building a city with where these weapons are used and tested. There is I said environmental impacts. There's the impacts on our carceral system and what it means to have a more militarized police and how that feeds into further incarcerating people who are most impacted. There's the racial issues. There's the reality that the people who live next door to Cop City are mostly black folks and they don't have a say in what happens. Um, because they can't vote for it, right? They can show up and testify, but not as citizens of Atlanta. Um, so there was there's a kind of multi-tactical work to stop Cop City, very decentralized, not a leadership around stopping Cop City, but like lots of different things going on, people doing direct actions, chaining themselves to construction equipment, putting their bodies on the lines, like literally like property destruction as a tactic, things like that. Um, and one of those tactics is how do we get Cop City on uh, a ballot for the residents of the city of Atlanta to decide whether or not the city should use the millions of dollars it's using, the hundreds of millions of dollars it's using um, to actually build this thing. So New Disabled South and New Disabled South Rising joined this coalition. We actually, the RC4 was the fiscal sponsor for the coalition, and with a bunch of other cross-movement organizations, racial justice, climate, abolitionist, democracy, disability, um, were able to gather 116,000 signatures from the entire city of Atlanta of folks who wanted to see Cop City on the ballot. Um, so disabled organizers were critical to this, and that's why we got involved, because disabled people are disproportionately impacted by all of these issues here. And to us, it was, directly a part of it, it made perfect sense for the work that we do in our organization, both C3 and C4. Um, and so there were pressure campaigns, petitions that went around outside. This is outside of just this getting signatures on the petition to get this on the ballot. Um, Public comment, a press and media strategy, direct actions, like lots of different tactics around this one specific Cop City Vote coalition. Um, Gathered those signatures, submitted them to the city. Unfortunately, even though our city's mayor is, a Democrat and progressive, the they thwarted democracy, have still never, to this day, have not verified the ballots that we submitted, are sitting in boxes, and Cop City is now built. Um, and it's a travesty, frankly. And if we talk about the death of democracy, we have to think about what happens at the local level too. And I could go on about the different political parties, but it's very unfortunate that you know, progressives are in, they receive money from the, Atlanta Police Foundation, which was a big, part of this funding and all of that. So the point of that is this is a critical local issue, but it also has national implications. They're now building cop cities across this country, particularly in a couple of other communities in the South. And so this work that we did and the work that continues still is now expanding, and we're a part of it in Tennessee and a couple other places to stop this from happening in other parts of the country. It has so many implications, but at the local level, I would actually say that it was a win, the Cop City Vote campaign, not because we didn't get it on the ballot, which was not a fault of our own, but because we now have a base of people, 116,000 people, significantly more than the total number of people who voted in the city of Atlanta in the last mayoral election, let alone the people who voted for the mayor. So that's like significantly more than the people who voted in the entire citywide election who signed this petition. Um, that's huge, and that shows power. And that's the reason why it's not on the ballot, is because it scared the crap out of them. And that was because there was cross movement, local organizing that happened around a shared goal. And listen, not every organization uh, that was a part of this was abolitionist. Not every organization had a racial justice lens necessarily. Not every organization agreed about what democracy work looked like. Some organizations that were part of that coalition don't necessarily believe in electoral organizing in that way. But everyone came together with a shared goal. That shared goal was get the issue of Cop City on the ballot to let the people decide. And there are organizations who are a part of that coalition that I was shocked to see join the coalition because, they do voting rights work, for example, but, they really don't say much about other issues because, for whatever reason, politically or otherwise, they don't want to say it. Like that brought people together. And there were people who signed the petition who didn't necessarily weren't necessarily against Cop City as a concept, but they wanted to see it get voted on, right? So like that is how you build that's one way of building a campaign and a base of people who are engaged and organized. Um, I'm going to give you one more example. I said I live in College Park. I was campaign manager for our city for College Park's mayor for her reelection campaign. She's the first black mayor in our city's history and the first woman mayor in our city's history as well. And again, we're talking about an 88% black city. So you can understand a little bit about what has gone on in the city for so long. Phenomenal, phenomenal human being. She was elected. We had new council members elected, and almost immediately noticed and realized that there was a lot of corruption that which we knew was happening behind the scenes with some council members, but that um, the one in particular, but a couple of the new people who were elected on the council also had some of those same, you know, kind of corrupt forces behind them, um, and because of misogynoir, really were against the mayor and what she wanted to do, which was kind of disrupt some of that um, in her reelection. So anyway, we all saw a couple, not we all, like a couple of me and a couple of my neighbors really saw that like we need to hold some of these council members accountable. Um, and people don't show up to public comment, people don't show up to get organized. So we like got together, a couple of us who were concerned about what was happening post election. And we just talked. We were like, what do we care about? And I can guarantee you there were Republicans in there were Democrats in there, independents, the gamut. Guarantee you there was far, I was probably the furthest left in the room, um, to like fairly right. Maybe not necessarily people who are, adamant Trump supporters in the room, but like fairly far to the right. Um, and we came together and said like this can't happen. And one of the most critical things that happened was for a couple of years, there was an effort here in College Park to build a battery storage facility in, it's actually very similar to Cop City, a lithium battery storage facility in the city of South Fulton, which is directly below College Park. In that city on land that the city of College Park owns. So the people and it's kind of like on the border of the two cities, but the people who live behind it cannot vote in College Park, but they were going to have lithium battery storage in their backyards, literally in their backyards. And for 2 years, the people who lived there had been coming to our council meetings begging for the council to not move this forward. Um, and they didn't vote it forward for 2 years. The mayor was like the deciding vote in both of those votes to not move it forward. It comes back around in a very shady way within like 2 weeks of this new council being elected. And the new council, it was put on the agenda um in a in a consent agenda. So basically, a bunch of items together mushed into one motion where there's no discussion that needs to happen, and one of them was to accept the rezoning to build this lithium battery storage facility on this land. And another item in that consent agenda was to accept a $5 million grant from Next Era battery storage facility or battery storage company who were building the battery storage facility. And this was added to the consent agenda 10 minutes before the council meeting. There was no discussion. There was no grant agreement. There were no details, nothing about it. And they voted this through. And it was very clearly pay to play. And that was the moment when a bunch of us were on Facebook, either there or we were on Facebook watching the live stream. We were like, we have to do something about this. So we came together, we talked about our shared concerns, and we formed United College Park, a political action committee, where we are dedicated to building a base of College Park citizens who are politically educated, um, and who can shape the way our government looks and the way it operates. Um, so we do political education. We have a press and media strategy. We are recruiting and endorsing candidates in our local elections, which are coming up, and we're very hopeful to replace two corrupt people on council with two very good people this November. Um, we also organized an effort to recall one of our council members who had newly elected council member who there were very many things that she could be recalled for. And we gathered, this was in the ward where I live, gathered a ton of support to recall her. We actually went to court over it. Um, it wound up being dropped because, well, we dropped it because she was using city resources to pay for her lawyer, and she was suing someone who works in the city who verified our signatures because she didn't think she should have verified our signatures, even though she was just doing her job. So now the city was paying to defend this person and to defend the council. Anyway, the point is, it was dropped, but we've organized all of this in the last year and a half. And we've done town halls and all sorts of things. And we now, at every council meeting, there are dozens of people who show up in person and also online who give public comment every single council meeting, who understand how the city functions, who understand how the charter works, our city charter, which is so confusing and outdated. But now people understand, and now there's a committee that the council put together after much of our urging to rewrite the charter because it is so outdated and rooted in white supremacy and all these things that make it impossible for certain things to happen. We had to go, and a lot of my work has been happening in my organization at the state capitol here during legislative session. Um, I was able to actually, since I'm there a lot of the time at the state capitol, do some work for United College Park while I was there to get our state level representatives to help us because they have some authority over what happens as well. So anyway, the point is like we brought people together across ideological differences, race, otherwise, are in our shared concerns for our city. And we now have a really strong, solid base of people who really, really care about the city and are working to make it better. And that's at the local level. That's in a city of 13,000 people. That's a small. And yet it's having a really important impact. And the last thing I'll say on this is that in our recall efforts, um, we there have been very few recall efforts in the state of Georgia because it is so hard to even get to the point where you're litigating it because the elected official has the right to bring it to court. The fact that we got to that point already and that the judge had to say to this, like had to directly uh deal with this issue and like kind of admonish the elected official and like that's a big win, not just for us, but for our state and for democracy in our state, um, because it now shows that it's actually possible to even get over some of the barriers that we were able to get over. So in that way, it wasn't a loss, it was a win, and that has a ripple effect. So I want to just briefly touch on running for local office, because it's really connected to both of these pieces, both of these examples. But you all are a part of this, disability victory community because you think running for office is important. So I think running for office is a really critical piece of we're thinking about how we do systems change at the local level. You can bring your lived experience. You want to make sure that whatever platform you're running on is rooted in the needs of your community, that you're developing in partnership with locals. Ideally, you build a team that reflects your community. And then you can also use your campaign as an organizing tool. So whether you win or not, um, think about what happens after that. If you don't win, can those people be a part of a base for you to help do some systems change outside of that election? So think about the base building beyond just the if you're running for office beyond your campaign. Uh,
Pause just real quick, Dom. I'm seeing someone said the captions weren't working. Nieta, they're still showing up for me. Um, captions still working for other folks, or did they break? Hey, yeah, they're still showing up for others. So maybe try toggling them off and on. Hmm, okay. Okay, I think we're good.
okay. Um, in the interest of time, I'm gonna like move pretty quickly through the next couple slides because I want to leave time for questions. But um, just a couple, best practices, and I'm gonna get into mapping your local power in a second. But leading with your relationships and with your values is really important. And that can be established relationships you have with your neighbors, relationships with your elected officials, with businesses in the community, et cetera. And then, of course, your values. Like, what are your values and how do they inform what happens in your neighborhood? Um, and then also, it's really good to get to know local reporters and media. Most places have local reporters and reporters who are specifically assigned to, a beat, which might be even if you live in a small town, they might cover your town. get to know those people. They can be, as reporters are supposed to be neutral, they can be sometimes your best way to get information out there um, in a way that you might not be able to do at a larger scale. So that's another, I think, good way to do some organizing locally. Um, and this is going to be interactive, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to um, move through the power mapping piece. So, power mapping, if you are not familiar, is an organizing tool that I actually use in other areas outside of organizing specifically, but is a really great way to figure out who holds power and how do you get to them. Um, so this is just a couple questions I think about when power mapping at the local level. So who represents me locally? That might be elected, or that might be, community influencers, business owners, things like that. What are the issues that matter most to the community, and then who has the power to make decisions about it? So this is an example of power mapping that I got off the internet, but I think it's a good visual. So in the middle, we see a circle, and this is policy systems organizing at the governmental level. But in the middle, we see a circle that says Mr. X, local official. And then there are arrows pointing out of that circle in different directions. Um, and the arrows point to different people. So one arrow points to Mr. K, owner of local newspaper. One points to Mr. Z, rich and powerful citizen. One points to Mr. G, religious leader. One points to Mr. T, tribal leader. One to Mrs. X, and assuming Mrs. X is married to Mr. X, the local official. And then out of Mrs. X, we see Mrs. W, local charity. Coming out of the Mr. G, religious leader, we see Mr. Y, tailor of Mr. X. Um, so basically, what this is doing is who's the key decision maker, who's the key person you want to influence in the middle, or issue, or whatever that is. And then you map out from there who influences that person, who or what influences that person, and then who or what influences that influencer. So if I'm thinking of my councilwoman, I might put as one of my uh, bubbles out of her bubble, or circle out of her circle, her pastor. Um, but I don't know her pastor. But I do know, Mrs. Jones, who attends church with that pastor. So I'm going to put an arrow out of the pastor and put Mrs. Jones. So I'm going to talk to Mrs. Jones, tell her about the issue, see if she can approach the pastor. She is going to go to the pastor and talk about the issue, and the pastor is going to be really intrigued and want to get involved. And then maybe I'll get looped in, and then that pastor is going to talk to the local official about the issue. That's how we think about power mapping as a tool. Um, and then just a few key points before we open up for questions, that just to emphasize that relationships are key. um, to local organizing, and that is again relationships with your neighbors, relationships with elected officials, and beyond. When we think about power mapping, also remember that you have power. So where are you in the power map? Because you have power. You have power to talk to your next door neighbor about sidewalk accessibility, and to ask if they had know 3 people they can bring to come to your house for dinner and talk about what you all can do together to make sure that the sidewalk infrastructure is improved, right? You have power, you're not powerless. And of course, there are realities that come into play around race, around gender, other factors that are just real. And some of us may inherently hold more privilege, and in turn have more power because of that. But also, how do you use that power and privilege in a way that empowers other people to build their own power and leadership. And then finally, as we said, like local wins build power at higher levels. So the work that you're doing in your city to hold your elected officials accountable, that's going to have a ripple effect elsewhere. And I think that is how we build the future that we want to see in this country. Unfortunately, the people that are up in Congress, the president, they they don't really care about people. They don't really care about you or I in our local communities. We have to build power to show them that they have to do what's right for us, and we do that. We can't just jump in and try to do that at the national level. We could try, but most effective is how do we start small and expand outward, and that's why it's so important to organize locally. So with that, thank you. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I'd love to answer any questions I can before we close. And thank you so much for the time.
Hey, we do have a question in the chat from Lauren. Is it more beneficial to build relationships to motivate like-minded people or build relationships across the aisle? And how do you do both?
Ooh, I think it depends on what you're organizing for. Uh, to me, it's more about shared values. Than party or even ideology. And so for me, um, if I if I care about how local policy impacts queer folks in my community, I'm probably not going to build a base that includes folks who don't like queer folks. Like that's probably not good, whether they're the same party as me or not. Like this is about shared values. So I just go values first for me, but I think it also depends on what you're organizing around.
Okay, and then I saw Nieta has raised their hand, so I will still unmute.
Hi, Dom. How are you? I I have an interesting question. So, how do you get a national issue, that has been impacted? I'm going to talk about we just had our virtual rally for against the autism registry on Saturday. And there's a lot, we can't stop this federal government. That's the reality. But we have federalism in our country. How do you convince state officials that this autism registry is the first step to 1930s Germany and that you need to sue? Like the AGs need to get it together and sue, like they're suing over everything else. But it seems like the disability community gets ignored. But I will say we did have three elected officials show up to our event, so I was happy about that. But overall, this issue has been not really talked about.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, first of all, it's huge that you had electeds there. And I think that if I'm thinking of it at like a local level, like I would probably start with like I think you can do this in tandem with going to the state capitol and talking to your state rep or like calling your state rep, whatever that looks like. But also, I think if we're thinking about starting small, like I would probably go to my neighbors and I would be like, there is a register. They want to create a registry. Like, does this sit right to you? And like, if I can build some support around that, I can set up a town hall in my local community. Like I've done this with things before, like set up a town hall in my local community, get people mobilized, and then expand and build out from there. And when you do that, that builds more power to then have a broader base of people who can call their state rep and be like, hey, this is really messed up and we need you to intervene and try to stop this. And the more, and electeds really are, for the most part, especially at the state level, really will move if they feel like they could lose re-election. It doesn't seem that way at the federal level a lot of times, but like at the state level, they really do are moved by when they get constituents calling. So the bigger of a base that you can build, the more pressure, and that takes time. Like sometimes we don't always have the time to do that. But I do think like it's worth starting like in my community and saying who are people that like may not be in disability space who don't know this issue, but like do some political education with them, even if it's just like go to their house for dinner and talk to them about it as an issue and get them to buy in and then build it from there.
Well, thank you. We are right at 2:30. So as we put in the chat, if we didn't get to your question, please feel free to send them to hello@disabilityvictory.org, and we will make sure to forward those to Dom. And thank you all for joining us today. As I said, we are going to we're going to caption the recording and put it up on our YouTube channel. So we'll send out an email when that is available. And thank you, Dom, for a great workshop. Definitely was very enlightening. So have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks.